Welcome to this Conversations on Groong episode. Today we're talking about domestic political developments in Armenia with Hayk Mamijanyan of the Badiv Unem Parliamentary Opposition Alliance. Welcome back, Hayk. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. Well, it's good morning in Armenia at the moment.
Good morning, good evening, and for our listeners, it depends on when they listen to this, so any time of the day. Hayk, let's begin with a question that we plan on asking most of our guests. Ever since the assassination attempt on July 13th, prospect of a Trump presidency is now much higher. Some would say a foregone conclusion. We wanted to ask you, Hayk, how you see the Trump presidency affecting the U.S. policy towards Caucasus. What should Armenia be ready for?
Well, I'm not a specialist in American politics. I'm just not more than an enthusiast. But there are some certain things that I'm quite sure about. There's always this discussion regarding is the Republican or a Democrat president or a concrete candidate or a president better or worse for Armenia. I cannot speak about the citizens of the United States who have the Armenian origins. They will speak to themselves. But regarding or towards the politics in South Caucasus, towards Armenia, I would say that you can work with any president. Taking into account the fact that American foreign policy is very institutionalized, I wouldn't say that if you have qualified diplomats back here in Armenia, it's a big problem. If we are speaking about the Trump foreign policy, I do think that it will be oriented much more to the internal issues. So he will be not that attentive to internal foreign agenda. And I do think that he will not be as active in South Caucasus as the current administration is. But again, I'm just an enthusiast in American politics, and it's just my opinion. But the cornerstone of my paradigm in this question, in this issue, is that we, the citizens of Armenia, do not participate, do not vote neither for Trump, neither for Biden, nor for Macron or Putin. So the only thing that the Armenian citizen can do is to hold accountable the government of Armenia, which he votes or not votes, to be able to work with the old administrations. So you can never ask Trump or Biden to be more patriotic and to love Armenia more than the, unfortunately, current government does. So first of all, short answer is that I'm just an enthusiast, but I do think that the Trump administration will be focused much more on domestic issues, and it will be less active on foreign politics. And a second, when you have such a brilliant team of diplomats with Ararat Mirzian, of course, I'm kidding, with Ararat Mirzian in charge, who is, I don't know if he's a historian or what's his, I don't know what his profession. We have Lilith Makuns as ambassador of Armenia to the United States. She was a brilliant choice because she knows the English well. Believe me, that was the choice. That was the reason she was chosen. She was the teacher for Pashinyan. So believe me, it doesn't matter who will be the president. If you have such diplomats, it doesn't really matter.
Hayk, one of the expectations from a Trump presidency is that he will not be interested in continuing this war in Ukraine. So essentially, when he comes on board with his relationship with Vladimir Putin, the hot part of the war may end up subsiding and going away. With that, also, there are expectations that Russia could start turning more attention towards the Caucasus. I wonder if you have any predictions about what can happen after the war in Ukraine abates and Russia has a little more attention span for the Caucasus again.
Well, let's frame it like that. Many experts, there are many columns about that Russia is too focused on the events in Europe and is not paying attention to the other regions. Well, and yes and no. Yes, of course, they have their all their sources mobilized into the, as they call it, main direction. But anyway, it's a big country and it has the very long-standing traditions of diplomacy. So I don't really think that it has completely forgotten South Caucasus or something like that. Of course, there will be much more attention. But again, speaking about Trump administration, uh, he didn't frame it like that. Definitely, I do think that there will be much more geopolitical tension in South Caucasus, taking into account the events in the Georgia. They have elections that are quite important elections for Georgia. Well, Azerbaijan has elections this year as well, but well, you know how the elections happen in Azerbaijan. Plus Armenia with its internal political tension and very important events ahead. So I do think that one of the greatest mistakes of Pashinyan administration is the fact that Armenia became an arena for the geopolitical cleansings, for the geopolitical clashes. When I always make this joke or saying, when two elephants are fighting, you can never predict which elephant will win. But the place where the arena where the battle is going to happen will be demolished completely. So you should never make your homeland, your country, an arena for the geopolitical clashes. You can never win from them.
Hayk, we last talked to you over a year and a half ago during the early days of the Artsakh blockade. A lot of Armenians, especially diaspora Armenians, think of Armenia as a free, open, hospitable country, and it's not natural for us to think that there are political prisoners in Armenia. People who are in jail simply because they don't see eye to eye with the current government, and there are dozens of them. We want to ask you about just a couple of them because in the past week there have been some updates about their status. On Monday, Mamikon Aslanyan, an opposition member who won his re-election bid as mayor of Vanatsor in the 2021 elections, was released from jail after more than 2.5 years. He was one of a half dozen opposition election winners who were harassed and jailed pretty much for winning elections as non-civil contract party members. We're not sure if this is a permanent or temporary release, but for the moment, he's out. Why is he released right now after 2 years and 7 months?
Well, there's some point in the judiciary, in the proceedings of the court, when it becomes, well, it's not a violation of the law. It becomes a raping of the law to keep a person in jail.
Mhm.
I will try to be as brief as possible, but the case is that Mr. Aslanyan was in prison for more than 2.5 years, as you mentioned, and without a verdict. So the trial is going, and not getting into details, but there were many witnesses, and all of them were heard by the court. And we were waiting that Mr. Aslanyan will be released because the official explanation is to keep the person in jail, that he couldn't affect words of the witness. And all the main witnesses were listened in the court, if I'm not mistaken, in December. So we were waiting for this in December. And in a day or or during the night, the court decides to add 10 more witnesses just to keep Mamikon arrested. And at least he is released. He was bailed out. The amount of bail is 10 million drams. Well, you shouldn't find or search for any logic here. He keeps people arrested just to punish them.
Why haven't these cases come under closer scrutiny from the European Union? Why hasn't, for example, the PACE paid more attention to these anti-democratic postures of the Armenian government?
Well, there are some reactions from international organizations regarding Mamikon and regarding Armen Ashotyan. The EPP, which is the largest political party in Europe, has made a resolution on that, mentioning the names. Same goes with the Centrist Democrat International, which is also a very large political organization. But when you get to the international organizations that are usually pioneers of human rights and democracy, there is surprising silence. And when you mentioned the PACE, I have to speak about the last resolution on the monitoring situation of Armenia. Well, I will just say one sentence from that report, from that resolution. I almost quote, "Nevertheless, there were clashes between the activists and the police used force or brutal force. It cannot go to a comparison with the 1st of March in 2008 when 10 people died. I cannot imagine more cynical expression." So they say, yes, there are problems. Yes, people are beaten on the streets of Yerevan, but you remember in 2008, on the 1st of March, 10 people died. So it's like written by Pashinyan. So those Nakhkins, those previous government leaders are coming back. And this is not the case that they didn't know, because each time when something happens in Armenia regarding the human rights, regarding the anti-democratic deeds of the government, we always inform about that international organization. I mean, oppositional factions in the parliament. For instance, when we say about Mamikon, who spent more than 2.5 years in prison, when we speak about Armen Ashotyan, who is in prison for more than 1 year, just for speaking up. Not like Malian, who is in jail for almost a year, just for speaking up. And just for a Facebook Live.
Right.
And when I'm speaking about these cases, I always want to speak also about Samvel Vartan, who is a war veteran who faced unbelievable deeds. When I am sure you know that when he was arrested, just for saying out loud his position on the ruling majority to an MP who he met in the street, well in the bus, actually, he was arrested. And while he was transferred from the police station to the investigative committee with handcuffs, escorted by the policeman, at some point in the center of Yerevan during the day, the police car stopped. The policeman went out of the car, and masked people entered the car, attacked him, humiliated, had beaten him, and then put him back to the police car. So I hope that a few years ago it would be an unimaginable thing to happen in Armenia.
When we saw that PACE report that we discussed with Rafael Ishkhanian a couple of weeks ago, he is a leader with the Helsinki Committee of Armenia. We were shocked because that very paragraph that you just referenced, the paragraph about March 2008, was shocking because it just basically felt like it was written by Pashinyan, handed over to them, and they cut and pasted it into the report. Doesn't the PACE understand that that is a political statement that's going into...
I always used to believe, and I'm going to think like that human rights values, democratic values, are higher than some, I wouldn't even name them, shady geopolitical interests. So unfortunately, most of the international organizations want to make me believe the contrary, because it's unbelievable silence, not only from them, from the embassies as well. None of them has spoken up about the beatings during the 12th of June that happened 1 month ago. So you see, when they say that it's important to have geopolitical support from one of the big powers to have the authorities changed or so-called revolution made in any country, I say no. The most important thing is the belief of the people. But international organizations had to do their job. They have to state when they see police brutality, when they see violations of human rights. Usual answer of my international colleagues to this is, well, there is police brutality in all the countries in the world, in European countries, in the United States, etc. Yes, of course. But usually there are investigations following them. It's not like...
we have a few more questions about the PACE report. I think that all the people that you mentioned, or most of the people that you mentioned, Narek, Malian, Armen Ashotyan, Mamikon Aslanyan, when they were being held, and Ashotyan and Malyan, of course, are still in detention, are being held under pretrial detention. And we talked about that institute as well. It's important to highlight that Armenia has become the number two position in Europe in terms of the percentage of pretrial detainees. And sometimes that goes lost on people. And they look at the overall low number of the prison population and say, oh, look, Armenia is doing great. But I never miss a chance to mention that actually during the Pashinyan time, he joined, since if you look at 2018, when the rate of the pretrial detention population was something around like in the 30s, 30 something percent. Now it's 54% in terms of the overall prison population. So on that aspect, let's talk also about Armen Ashotyan, who is leader of the Republican Party of Armenia, the vice president, I guess. So Armen Ashotyan, as we said, is another pretrial detainee. And his trial also keeps being postponed. And Ashotyan just lingers in jail without bail, without even a light at the end of the tunnel. So we want to begin by asking, what are his current conditions? How frequently is he allowed visitation? I think those aspects are also important to highlight because at least in the beginning, we know that he was only allowed visits by family and held under very strict conditions.
No, it was much worse. First 2.5 months, he was banned even from the visits of the family, of the phone calls, etc. So for 2 and something months, he couldn't even see his underage children, his wife, and so on. Speaking about the pretrial detention, yes, it has just become a way of punishment in Armenia. After that, he was allowed for the visits of the family, as it's allowed for all the inmates. So I guess it's one in a month or twice in a month or something like that, and a phone call once a week or something like that. Of course, by the Armenian law, they cannot ban the visits in that point. They cannot ban the visits of the MPs. And I was with Armen the day before yesterday. Of course, he is in good spirits, eager to continue his fight. And when we speak about the case of Armen, it's another ludicrous case because there is no victim. I mean, literally. There was a woman who, in open court, said that she is not a victim of this case and she should be dismissed. So the person is in jail for more than 1 year and will be for 2 months more because of the decision of the court. Actually, there is a court hearing today in 2 hours, but there is no victim. There are statements from international organizations. There are some awful things in this case. All the oppositional MPs, I repeat, all the oppositional MPs gave guarantee 3 months ago for Armen to be released or at least moved to a home arrest. It was refused. There was a guarantee by the former president of Colombia, a guarantee for Armen by the president of Colombia, Mr. Pastrana. And you know what was the answer of the judge? I don't know.
Yes, I do, but go ahead. Yes,
I don't know personally the former president of Colombia, so he can't be a guarantor. And I quote, there were 2 guarantees from the former president of Colombia, who is the head of the IDC, which Republican Party is member. And there was a guarantee by the former head of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, well-respected politician from Georgia. The answer of the judge was, I don't know them personally. So what did they say?
I know it's absurd.
That's pretty funny. And I think that I'm not a lawyer, but I think that this is because Armenian law requires notable people. And just because someone is not notable to the judge, or the judge doesn't know about them.
Well, but there were cases where there were the leaders of the church guaranteeing former prime ministers, heads of the parliament, current acting MPs. So Pashinyan just decided that Armen has to be behind the bars.
So why are Western diplomats in Armenia, in fact, all diplomats, silent on these issues as well, on the issue of political prisoners? Have you had discussions with them? I'm sure you have, but let us know some of your impressions.
That's a question that I have to ask. Why are they silent?
And Hayk, we
And
usually
yes,
talk about
yeah.
Western diplomats, the ambassadors, but what about the Russian or the Chinese or Indian or any of these ambassadors? It's very clear that this is an HR issue.
Let's frame it like this. A few points. First of all, yes, we always speak about Western diplomats and Western politicians. And the reason is that traditionally they are very vocal on human rights and democracy. In our country, I don't even remember at least one case when a Russian or Chinese diplomat has ever spoken about some issues during these 30 years. But of course, during all the meetings with diplomats here in Armenia, with my colleagues from Europe, from the United States, Russia, or China, or any country, I will speak about these issues. So they are definitely aware of it. Why it's not spoken, I cannot answer on their behalf, unfortunately. But they are informed about it in details with the facts.
Do you think the reasons are geopolitical? Are these diplomats, for example, protecting a government that is looking after their national interests instead of Armenia's?
Well, at least it's something that we can think of. At least it's one of the logic explanations. But I always say the same thing about Pashinyan. Whoever thinks that he can come to an agreement with Pashinyan is mistaken. There is not a single example when he got into agreement and hold his end of the bargain. And it goes for both for the local level, because the judges, the policemen, the law enforcement that became a speechless tool in his hands are now being prosecuted, at least some of them. Yesterday, we had the decision regarding Judge Anna Danibekyan, who was the judge for the second president of Armenia, and is, if I'm not mistaken, and has very many decisions that were written by Pashinyan, and she was the one who read them. And there are very many cases with the ministers and MPs, etc. He is not a team player. He has only one interest: to keep his chair, to keep his power. And he will collude with anyone. I mean, literally anyone. I won't be surprised if someday he will collude with Aliyev or Erdogan just to keep his power.
Going back to the PACE report, you were actually there on June 26th as part of the Armenian delegation. Yeah. And, we covered that report in detail with, as Asbed said, with Rafael Ishkhanyan. For those listening to us, that's episode 343. You can check it out on YouTube or anywhere else. The overall theme of the report was, it seemed like they would mention most of the things that are wrong in Armenia, but they would sugarcoat it in language that said, well, despite all the negative things happening, the Armenian government overall did a good job. And they, it seems like, mentioned every single excuse they could, like, the war, the Artsakh refugees, and it's just that so much things are happening. But despite all of this, Armenia is doing a good job. So I want to ask, were you privy to how this report was first written? How was the sausage made, as they say? And what can you tell us about, did you raise any issues when the drafts were being circulated internally before it came to the assembly for the vote?
Yeah, of course. Well, the logic is that there is a draft report sent to us in March or something. It was declassified, that's the term they use in PAS, and sent to us. Actually, it was online, if I'm not mistaken. We, as the Pativunem, within our faction, and I know that the Hayastan faction did that too, sent to the rapporteurs a very detailed document. It was made, one was made by our faction and another was made by Hayastan. I saw that. It was a very detailed document, including all the cases of human rights violations, the backslides of the democracy, problems in judiciary with the law enforcement, police brutality, etc. I mean, it was really detailed with the facts, with dates, the links when they could watch it, see if we are speaking the truth, etc. So they had it from March. Of course, we always have met with the rapporteurs whenever we were in Strasbourg or whenever they were on a trip to Armenia. So they had all the information. I mean, not in a political way by, I don't know, my interviews or my statements in the parliament. I mean, as a document, detailed with the facts, etc. When you see their reaction to that document, I mean, what can you say? Because going back to the case of Samvel Vartanyan, I had to send my amendments and suggestions for the draft report, and the Samvel Vartanyan's case happened. So I had to send it 2 days after that just to include this case as well. So it was that up-to-date information they got. Well, they usually answer that there is opposition and a ruling majority in all the countries. Everywhere you can find some issues, etc., etc., etc. But during the very same session of the PASE, there was a report on Georgia, a resolution on Georgia. And it's completely vice versa.
Yeah, completely.
For instance, it's written in the Armenian report that, and again, I'm not speaking that something is true or something is false. I'm just speaking about the facts. When they were speaking about the Armenian so-called authorities, they were saying that, okay, they are legally elected authorities, etc., 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 and people have to deal with it. And it's completely different wording in the resolution regarding Georgia. They are not mentioning they are elected, etc., etc., etc. I mean, I'm all against the double standards. And usually when international organizations use double standards, it brings the fact that Armenian people start to not to believe them because they can see it, because they live in it.
In fact, during your speech, during the deliberations on this resolution, you said, and I'm quoting, that the Pashinyan administration is being given, quote, a carte blanche for brutality and judicial anarchy. So we want to ask you, why is the EU and the West giving Pashinyan a carte blanche?
I don't have the answer for that question. You see, again, I'm not trying to make a villain of West, of the United States, of Europe, or from Russia, or from France. Of course, when you mediate, and I have said that very many times on Armenian TV, when someone is a mediator between two fighting entities, and they try to make them stop fighting, one of the participants of the fight refuses everything and wants everything settled on his terms. The other one is ready to give up anything. I'm sure any mediator will go with the road that leads to less complications. So, of course, person who is okay with giving up anything is very easy to communicate with. And I'm not angry with any international institution or any international entity that they are not fighting for the half of the village of Kirans, which now will be under Azerbaijani control because Pashinyan gave it to them. It's not their job to be more patriotic than we are. It's our job to make Pashinyan, well, to be honest, to make Pashinyan resign because there is no other possibility.
Hayk, also late in June, a group of extra-parliamentary political parties held a hearing in a subcommittee of the Armenian National Assembly, and they were pressing on the civil contract-led government to hold a referendum on joining the EU. A week later, Alen Simonyan, on his trip to Latvia, gave more credence to this possibility, but later his spokesperson had to backtrack and said that Simonyan was expressing his own political opinion. Later, Pashinyan also poured cold water on this idea, effectively saying that the EU is not ready to admit Armenia. So what's the deal with the civil contract flip-flop on the EU direction? What's going on here?
Well, I have a theory here with the whole referendum and constitutional referendum story, and I will share it with you. First of all, referendum is the last, very last step in EU integration. For instance, Ukraine and Moldova haven't even got near to that step. And I'm sure Alen Simonyan knows that. But first, with the Armenian legislation, if there will be a change of the state border during these negotiations with Azerbaijan, Pashinyan has to go for a referendum. It's the law. Well, in Gdansk, they have somehow managed to fool all of us. They are stating that there was no state border, so there is no change of state border. But he can go that for the whole demarcation and delimitation process, because at least with the Tigran and at least with Jermuk, there will be problems. So he, and it's in my humble opinion, he is using political technology. He's now setting some fake news that, oh, EU integration referendum, etc., etc., etc. And when it comes to the part of referendum, which will be about giving out our homeland, he has some bloggers and some fake news YouTube channels, which are unfortunately very popular in Armenia. The message, the fake message will be the following. You remember Alen Simonyan was speaking a year ago about a referendum of EU integration? Well, this referendum is about EU integration. But I repeat, the referendum will be about giving out our homeland, about changing the state border. So, one, he will use this as a technique, as a political technique, to justify giving out our homeland.
So you're saying the big letters are going to say EU integration, the small letters are going to say...
Yep. No. There will be no letters saying about anything about the Westernization or EU integration, but it will be presented as that. The example was completely correct. It will be buried in a small print. And the second possibility that I do think will happen regarding the referendum, the constitutional referendum. You know that there is big discussion on that, the fact that Aliyev is demanding to change the constitution.
Right.
And I do know that Pashinyan will give up anything during negotiations. I mean, lands, I mean, strategic heights, I mean, Tigran or whatever. But of course, as in any negotiations, each side has to have some of face saving. So he has to come back to Armenia with something. And I do think, and again, it's my humble opinion, that he will come back, I don't know, in a few months, saying that, okay, I lost Gdansk, I lost Jermuk, I lost Tigran, I lost lands in Vartenis, and etc. But I saved our constitution because only Armenian people can decide what our constitution will be. So I do think that the whole discussion regarding the changes in constitution are just a preparation for a stunt of Pashinyan making a home run or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. In fact, looking at the most recent polls, it seems like most people in Armenia don't want to change the constitution. So they can go through the motions, they can pretend to hold a referendum, and the referendum does not go through. So they can say exactly like you did, that the Armenian people have decided. It's quite interesting that if people would buy this. But I do want to move us on to our last topic of discussion, Hayk. Look, we hear that Azerbaijan is preparing for a war in November after the COP29 summit. The author of that statement, of that idea, is not some low-ranking or medium-ranking or high-ranking opposition member. That statement comes from the official Ministry of the Foreign Affairs in Armenia, who alleges that Azerbaijan will start a war after the COP29. Meanwhile, in a country that is essentially months away from war, again, that is according to the MFA, Pashinyan is taking a month-long vacation, a foreign vacation. He is posting videos of his travels. He's posting videos of him riding a bike in Berlin, for instance, with apparently no cares in the world. He attended a football match in Germany, and he posted a video of his face only, observing the match, nothing else, and also his wife in the background, and some inexplicable song about a nasty girl, and so forth. And as we saw recently, the MPG poll, the most recent MPG poll, Pashinyan's approval rating has risen to 35%. So it has gotten a small bump, in fact, recently. So we know that Pashinyan has been in the media business his entire life. He knows how to manipulate public opinion, and he's probably doing that. What is his messaging in these videos? What's your takeaway from his messaging?
Besides an awful taste in ties from that video and the messaging of the state propaganda in Armenia is the following. I have to say this part in Armenian because it's a part of the song. So you should party all the time because the world belongs to you. Well, it's a song in Armenian. I'm sure most of our listeners know the song. That's the state propaganda. They're trying to manipulate people, saying, "Aren't you fed up of wars, of defending your land? We can go hand by hand with Azerbaijan and Turkey, and you will live freely. You will have cheap flights to Europe." That's not the case that the plane not always departs, for instance, because there are some air companies that belong to the representatives of the regime. They promise very cheap tickets, and it was a massive state propaganda one point. But now those companies don't really fly, don't really depart. People buy tickets, and they are left with nothing. So it's the case with everything. They are trying to make people think, okay, enjoy your life. Don't think about Karabakh. Don't think about war. Don't think about the fact that Azerbaijan is getting more and more lands. Well, enjoy your life. But whenever something happens and there is a need to make people fear, they are speaking about war. Can you imagine a leader, a prime minister of country who goes to meet with his own citizens and is trying to threaten them with war? Stay calm, or Azerbaijan will make one more aggression. Regarding the ratings, anytime when a large oppositional activities occur, take place, and they don't bring results fast, usually there is a bump in his approval ratings. So it's nothing new. It's not something to be surprised of, or it doesn't mean anything important. It happens all the times. It happens like that after the Madrutsun movement, after the Pashinyan movement. So it's not something new.
Yes, in fact, you actually beat me to my next question, which is about a month ago, we saw a completely different reaction from Pashinyan on the streets. I think he was very nervous, and that resulted in the beatings and the injuries to many of the protesters on June 12th, and on the unleashing of the tremendous amount of force against peaceful protesters. Can we say that essentially this new behavior by Pashinyan is his victory dance over at least the unconscious opposition? Has there been any accounting on why this movement failed? Has there been any retrospection? What can you tell us about that?
First of all, I wouldn't state that this movement has failed. It continues. It did. They have, we have big plans. I wouldn't frame it as it failed. One. Second, when they usually say that Pashinyan these things, I always say that he has two possible futures. One is in the cabinet of the Prime Minister of Armenia, and the second is in a prison cell. So he will do everything. He will use police brutality, judges, courts. Maybe he will come out and starts to shoot a gun himself. I can predict that. The other question is what we are going to do about that. We, I mean the patriots. Because in reality, that's the only question. What are we going to do about it?
And that is my question to you as well, Hayk.
Yeah. And I do believe that Archbishop Bagrat has stated that he's continuing this movement. And as in the beginning, same as now, the Republican Party of Armenia, the Party UNEM, I've on our faction, will be with Archbishop Bagrat as long as he's on the streets. I mean, politically, I mean, with the resources, I mean, on the streets, I mean, in the parliament, etc., you name it. For the Republican Party, the prime goal is the change of power in Armenia. And I underline this fact. We are not fighting for gaining power. We are fighting for a change of power in our country. And I do think that whenever all the actors will be on the same page with this, we will accomplish some of our goals.
Hayk, you just mentioned Bagrat Srbazan's movement, which is supposedly regrouping and reorganizing right now. But the MPG poll that just came out shows that there's a big drop in its popularity, over 20% since the last poll. We were just talking to an analyst yesterday, and he said that this poll shows that Pashinyan has essentially won this round. And so people are actually wanting to back a winner. That's why he is up a little bit and Bagrat Srbazan's movement is down. What's your assessment of Srbazan's movement?
It's natural anytime something like that happens. So I'm not really worried about those polls, first. Second, yes, it's regrouping. Yes, it's planning its deeds. And, you know, we usually call it consensus -1 in our country. Actually, all the main political forces are stating that Pashinyan has to resign, except Pashinyan himself. I do believe that the consolidation that was reached by Bagrat Srbazan is very important and it's crucial. And I do believe that the consolidation on the political arena will transform to the consolidation of the population. So looking forward, we will be backing and helping and promoting and investing with human resources and political resources to the movement as we did from day one.
All right, let's leave it there for today. Thank you, Hayk, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Hayk.
Have a good one.
That's our show today. This episode was recorded on July 18, 2024. We've been talking with Hayk Mamijanyan, who is the leader of the opposition Badiv Unem with Honor Alliance in the Armenian National Assembly and a member of the Republican Party of Armenia. He's also a member of the parliamentary group representing Armenia at the PACE, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Please remember to support us. Go to our donate page, podcasts.groong.org/donate, and become a sustaining member of Groong and give monthly. Thank you in advance. I'm Asbed Bedrossian.
And this is Hovik Manucharyan.
Please follow us on social media and follow us everywhere you get your Armenian news. The links are in the show notes. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon.